In the United States, you're free to say what you want, go where you want, and live how you want, but only up to a point. Because in one U.S. state, it's actually illegal to own just one guinea pig. That's right. Having two is fine. One, you could technically be breaking the law. In another state, you could be fined for carrying an ice cream cone in your pocket, not eating it, not stealing it, just having it there. And those are only the mild ones. Across America, there are hundreds of strange, outdated, and downright unbelievable laws that still exist today. Some written over 100 years ago, others passed for reasons that make absolutely no sense in modern life. Laws that ban specific clothing, laws that control how you kiss, laws that tell you what animals you can own, how you can eat, or even how you're allowed to behave in public. And here's the shocking part. Some of these laws aren't just funny trivia. They're still on the books, and in rare cases, they've actually been used to arrest real people. So as strange as this may sound, you might already be breaking a law without even knowing it. Stay until the end, because some of the laws you're about to hear are so bizarre, so outdated, and so unexpected, people have actually been arrested for them. And once you hear them, you'll never look at American laws the same way again. Before we dive in, there's something important to understand. Not every law you're about to hear is actively enforced today. Many of them were written decades, or even centuries ago, for very specific reasons that made sense at the time. Some were created to solve problems that no longer exist. Others were responses to cultural norms, moral beliefs, or unusual situations that sound ridiculous by today's standards. In many cases, these laws were never officially removed. They're still technically on the books, quietly sitting in legal codes, rarely noticed, and almost never enforced. That said, enforcement can vary widely depending on where you are. What's ignored in one city might be enforced in another. Some laws apply statewide, while others exist only at the city or county level. And while most of these rules won't land anyone in jail, there have been moments where old, obscure laws were suddenly enforced, often catching people completely off guard. So think of this not just as a list of weird trivia, but as a glimpse into America's legal past. And a reminder that sometimes the law doesn't disappear, it just waits to be forgotten. Now let's get into the strange ones. Let's start with animals. Because for some reason, lawmakers across the country have had very strong opinions about how Americans interact with them. And we'll begin with one of the most famous examples. In Switzerland. Actually, no. Surprisingly, the United States. In several U.S. jurisdictions, it's considered illegal to own just one guinea pig. Guinea pigs are highly social animals, and the law was created out of concern for animal welfare. The logic is simple. A single guinea pig can become lonely, stressed, and unhealthy. So if you're going to own one, you're legally encouraged to own at least two. It's strange, it's specific, and it's one of the few laws on this list that was actually created with good intentions. Now let's get a little weirder. In California, there's a law stating that frogs cannot be eaten if they die during a frog jumping contest. Yes. Frog jumping contests are a real thing. And yes, lawmakers felt the need to clarify what happens after the jumping is over. The law was created to prevent people from intentionally harming frogs for food under the guise of entertainment. If a frog dies naturally during the event, it cannot legally end up on a dinner plate. In Minnesota, it's illegal to tease a skunk. The law doesn't specify what counts as teasing, but the intent was to prevent animal cruelty, and possibly to protect people from making very bad decisions. Because antagonizing a skunk rarely ends well. Meanwhile, in Kentucky, it's illegal to dye ducklings blue, or any unnatural color for that matter. This law was passed to stop people from using dyed baby animals as novelty items or prizes, especially around Easter. At the time, brightly colored ducklings were often sold cheaply, with little concern for their survival. So while it sounds silly today, the law was meant to stop a very real problem. Now let's take to the skies. In Wyoming, you're not allowed to take photographs of rabbits from a helicopter. This law dates back to concerns about hunters using aircraft to track and kill wildlife unfairly. Over time, it was expanded to include photography as well, just to remove any loopholes. So technically, if you're flying over Wyoming in a helicopter and see a rabbit below, keep your camera down. In Hawaii, it's illegal to own a mongoose. Mongooses were originally introduced to control rat populations on sugar plantations. Unfortunately, they became invasive, preying on native birds and damaging the ecosystem. The law now strictly prohibits ownership, and violating it can come with serious fines. In Pennsylvania, it's illegal to sing while bathing. No, this wasn't aimed at ruining your shower concerts. The law was originally connected to noise complaints and public decency concerns in shared housing. While it's almost never enforced today, it technically still exists in certain local codes. And finally, one of the most unexpected animal laws on the books. In Alaska, you're not allowed to wake a sleeping bear for the purpose of taking a photograph. This one might sound obvious, but it's written into law. Why? Because people kept doing it. The law was created after multiple incidents where tourists endangered themselves and the bears, all for the sake of a photo. And that's a pattern you'll see again and again in this video. As strange as these laws sound, almost all of them exist because someone, somewhere, once did something so questionable. Lawmakers felt they had no choice but to step in. And as we move forward, the laws only get stranger, especially when food, clothing, and human behavior get involved. Now let's talk about food, because in America, even eating can come with rules you'd never expect. And some of these raise a very real question. Would you get arrested for this? Let's start in Alabama. In Alabama, it's illegal to carry an ice cream cone in your back pocket. Yes, specifically the back pocket. This law dates back to the early 1900s, when stealing horses was a serious problem. Thieves would lure horses away by placing treats in their pockets, letting the animals follow them unnoticed. Ice cream became one of those treats, and instead of rewriting theft laws, lawmakers banned the ice cream trick entirely. So today, eating ice cream is perfectly legal. Holding it is fine. But putting it in your back pocket? Technically illegal. Would you get arrested for this? Almost certainly not. But the law still exists. Now let's head west. In Arizona, you can't just cut down a cactus, even if it's on your property. Many species of cactus are protected by law, and removing one without permission can result in heavy fines, sometimes thousands of dollars. So if you decide to redecorate your yard and remove a cactus without checking first, would you get arrested for this? It's possible. In Vermont, there's a law that says pie must be served with ice cream. This one sounds like a joke, but it was actually introduced to settle a heated debate. At one point, lawmakers officially declared that apple pie should be served with a good faith serving of ice cream, cheddar cheese, or milk. While it's more of a symbolic resolution than a criminal offense, it still stands as one of the most strangely specific food laws in the country. Would you get arrested for serving pie alone? Number. But you might get some very strong opinions. Now let's go to Florida, where even fruit can get you in trouble. In many parts of Florida, it's illegal to sell oranges on the sidewalk without a permit. Florida's citrus industry is heavily regulated, and these laws were created to prevent unlicensed vendors from undercutting farmers and selling unsafe produce. So that roadside orange stand you see? If it's unlicensed, would you get arrested for this? Fined? Absolutely. Shut down? Very likely. And finally, one of the most surprising food-related laws. In parts of Louisiana, pizza delivery drivers were once prohibited from accepting tips. This rule came from local labor regulations meant to prevent unfair wage practices and under-the-table payments. While most of these laws have since been repealed or ignored, at one point, accepting a tip could technically put a delivery driver in violation of local ordinances. So imagine this. You order a pizza. You try to tip the driver, and that tip is illegal. Would anyone actually get arrested for this? Probably not. But as you're starting to see, American laws don't always disappear. They just fade into obscurity. And coming up next, things get even more personal. Because in some states, what you wear and how you look has actually been regulated by law. Now let's move on to something a little closer to home. What you wear, how you look, and how lawmakers once decided those things mattered a lot more than you'd expect. Many of the laws in this section fall under what were known as morality laws, rules created to enforce public decency, social norms, and proper behavior. By today's standards, they sound strange, but at the time they were taken very seriously. Let's start in Alabama. In Alabama, it was once illegal to wear a fake mustache in church if it caused laughter. The problem wasn't the mustache itself. It was the disruption. Church services were considered sacred spaces, and anything that distracted or entertained the congregation could be viewed as disorderly conduct. So, if your fake mustache made people laugh during a sermon, that wasn't comedy, it was a crime. Would anyone enforce this today? Almost certainly not. But the law still exists in historical records, a reminder of how tightly behavior was once regulated. Next up is Indiana, with one of the most oddly specific laws on this list. In Indiana, there was a law stating that men with mustaches were prohibited from kissing people. This rule was rooted in public health concerns. At one point, facial hair was believed to carry germs and spread disease, especially in close contact. Lawmakers decided the solution wasn't hygiene education, it was banning mustache kisses altogether. So if you had a mustache and a habit of kissing people, that could technically make you a public health risk. Would this ever be enforced today? Number. But it shows how fear and misinformation can become law surprisingly easily. And finally, one of the most revealing examples of all. In parts of California, women were once legally prohibited from wearing pants. These laws date back to the 1800s and early 1900s, when clothing was tightly tied to gender roles and public morality. Women wearing pants were considered indecent or disruptive to social order. In some cities, women could be fined or detained simply for dressing comfortably. Eventually, these laws were challenged, ignored, and quietly removed. But for years, they were enforced without question. And that's the common thread here. Most clothing and appearance laws weren't about safety. They were about control, about enforcing norms, about deciding what was appropriate. Many of these rules are now outdated, ignored, or forgotten. But some of them still technically exist, buried deep in local codes, never officially erased. And as strange as that sounds, what's coming next gets even more personal. Because in some states, the law once regulated who you could kiss, how you could live, and what relationships were considered acceptable. And that's where things get truly uncomfortable. Now we move into a category that feels a little more uncomfortable. Laws that once tried to regulate relationships, personal behavior, and private life. Many of these rules were created during periods when lawmakers believed it was the government's role to enforce morality. Today, most of them sound outdated, but several are still technically part of state law. Let's start in Michigan. In Michigan, adultery is still classified as a felony. The law dates back to the 1930s and was intended to protect the institution of marriage. While prosecutions are extremely rare, the statute has never been formally repealed. In theory, violating it could carry serious penalties. In reality, it's almost never enforced, but it has occasionally been cited in divorce and custody cases. So while no one is being arrested over it today, the law still exists, quietly. Now let's go north to Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, it was once illegal to kiss on a train platform. This law was passed to discourage public displays of affection in crowded areas. Lawmakers believed such behavior was improper and disruptive to public order. The rule applied specifically to train platforms, where large crowds gathered and etiquette was strictly enforced. Would anyone enforce this today? Highly unlikely, but at one point, even a brief goodbye kiss could technically violate the law. In Mississippi, there was a long-standing rule that unmarried couples could not live together. This law reflected older beliefs about family structure and morality. It was used to discourage cohabitation outside of marriage and reinforce social norms. For years, violations could result in fines. Eventually, the law became impossible to enforce and fell out of practical use, though for a long time it remained part of the legal code. And then there's Texas. In Texas, there was a statute stating that owning more than 6 intimate devices was illegal. The law was introduced as part of broader obscenity regulations and attempted to define limits on personal ownership rather than behavior. Over time, it became the subject of legal challenges and public debate. While the statute is no longer actively enforced, it remained on the books for years, and in some contexts was referenced in court cases. What all of these laws have in common is not how strange they sound today, but how seriously they were once taken. They weren't written as jokes. They weren't meant as trivia. They were real attempts to regulate private life. Most of these laws are now ignored, challenged, or unenforceable, but their presence is a reminder of how closely personal behavior was once monitored, and in some cases, still is. Coming up next, we'll shift away from private life and back into the public world. Because when it comes to travel, transportation, and moving from place to place, America has passed some very unusual laws there too. Before we continue, a quick moment. If you're enjoying this so far, or if any of these laws surprised you, hitting the like button really does help the channel.